One of the biggest risks that a business can encounter is bringing in the influence of a third party into the privacy landscape. Hello and welcome back to Privacy Professional Training. My name is Fumi Owolabi. On my channel, we talk about passing privacy exams with privacy professionals. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the Certified Information Privacy Manager exam. We're going to be looking at Domain 4, and the background information I want to provide for anybody who this is their first time of taking the CIPM exam is the exam itself is 90 questions. You have 2.5 hours to complete all of the questions. So you've got a little bit over 1.5 minutes to answer each specific question. So you're going to need to be able to recall different types of concepts very quickly. What I wanted to do specifically for Domain 4 is provide some contextual insights on what a privacy manager is going to understand from a practical component while reviewing the materials for taking the exam. But I think that conceptualizing the different role and tasks that a privacy manager does helps in explaining or remembering the different concepts that are going to be required for taking this exam. Domain 4 is all about protecting personal data. Everybody within the organization. We looked in Domain 1 at the roles and responsibilities of different individuals within the privacy program, but we're going to be talking specifically in Domain 4 about protecting personal data and what that looks like from a concept perspective and then also from a practical perspective. So being able to classify the personal data on whether it's public, confidential, or restricted. This is going to be very important, and sometimes there are legislative influences on this, sometimes there are not. But in a role as a privacy manager, you're going to need to be able to liaise with your security counterparts to be able to classify data in tandem with the security program that is being run at the organization. So being also able to understand what constitutes public, what is considered confidential, you're going to need to be able to understand those concepts very quickly. And understanding the purposes and limitations of different types of controls. Now that's a very abstract discussion, but what it could look like in practice could be prior to the collection of any personal data, right? We know that one of the foundational concepts is purpose limitation. There should be a purpose and a limit on how personal data is retained. Purpose limitation effectively states that there should be a purpose for collecting personal data. You should definitely not be collecting data just because. There should always be a purpose. Now, the limitations on this could be if you collected personal data for one purpose, which is email marketing, and you have provided notice to a consumer that you're collecting their name and email address for email marketing. It is the expectation of the organization to not go ahead and use that information for a secondary purpose like selling data to a third party. Because the notice that has been provided and the purpose for the original collection is email marketing. It's not selling data. If there is going to be a secondary use, there needs to be a review by the privacy team. There needs to be a policy documentation that's distributed to the group, identifying why the scope has changed, and also what it looks like, and if there's any legislative ramifications, if additional notice needs to be provided. And this is how you see that each component and competency that you're tested on in the exam, they all tie into one another, because this is also going to be influenced by what you see in the data inventory. It's also going to be influenced by the data flow diagrams that are created within the organization. So in addition to this, when we look at protecting data, we know that we need to put in place different technical, organizational, and administrative measures. So what is an administrative measure? An administrative measure could be something like putting in place a retention policy that details how to retain data. Putting in place that policy is an administrative control. A technical control is something like an access control, role-based access control, discretionary access control, right? Those are technical controls. Then we're looking at organizational measures. An organizational measure could be having a data protection officer that is appointed over data protection matters. So altogether, all of these measures are going to ensure that risk is evaluated and documented by the privacy manager. So in this section in protecting data, we are looking at this concept of privacy by design. Now, if you are a Privacy Pro veteran, you're very familiar with the concept of privacy by design. If you are brand new to privacy, privacy by design essentially looks at ensuring that the concept of data protection is implemented at the beginning of any project, phase, or activity. Now, I've just limited it to those three because I think that you can capture the essence of what privacy by design requires. But effectively, anytime an organization is going to engage in a particular type of project, understanding that there needs to be liaison with the privacy team is going to be essential. It should be at the forefront. It should not be an afterthought. Now, let me give an example of what an afterthought to privacy might look like. It might look like a specification document that is created by the engineering team, specification on a product. The specification document goes into development, maybe by the software development team or the privacy engineers. And there's no discussion of functionality on what the user experience is going to be when we need to distribute notice, obtaining consent if it's required. None of those are taken into consideration when the product is being developed. So having privacy as the afterthought is asking for privacy to approve a product that has never had any discussion about the user experience or the presentation of notice if this product is going to be collecting personal data. Now, there should be policy documentation, and I've talked about that in other domains, that are created that take into consideration each different stakeholder within the business. I will use myself as an example. So my area of the business is the legal department. I do not conduct any HR activities. I do not conduct any sale activities. I do not conduct any marketing activities. I mean, I do for the firm, but it's not my primary source of work. So the reason I gave that example is because there's going to need to be privacy documentation that addresses each different business unit. There's privacy documentation that is exclusive for the legal team. There's privacy documentation that is exclusive for the HR team. Now, when we talk about privacy by design and we look at, let's just talk about the product team, we're thinking about what types of considerations is a product team going to have as it relates to the products they're creating. Are they going to be processing sensitive data? Let's distribute one-page documents that let them know what needs to happen when sensitive personal data is collected. If an engineering team is going to be creating a new product in a geography that is considered a third country under certain privacy legislation, what are the considerations that need to be put in place when creating a product in those geographies? What are our thought processes when it comes to cross-border data transfers? Those are looking at these very key privacy concepts prior to the creation of any product or project or activity. Sometimes the activities are internal. They don't have any third parties involved. There's no third party due diligence. But there is going to be a component of liaison between different business units that traditionally don't liaise with one another. What does looking at the applications and repositories that are going to be used for this internal activity going to look like, and what needs to be distributed towards these three groups? And that's really what privacy by design looks at. And you're going to need to be able to apply privacy by design in lots of different formats, whether it's liaising with a third party, whether it's creating different products that are going to be sold to consumers, whether it's an internal activity that could take place just within the organization, but the organization is large. So integrating those principles into privacy by design are covered in Domain 4. Now, let's talk about enforcement. Now, I talked a lot about enforcement from a regulatory standpoint, but there also needs to be an enforcement that happens within the business itself. How do we enforce the privacy documents that we have drafted for the different components within the organization? How do we ensure that in the creation of products for 2026, our engineering team is bringing privacy in after the first discussion? How do we ensure that the marketing team, when they are doing their campaigns and going to different events around the states, they are making sure that they are presenting just-in-time notices to verify that we are actually able to collect information at these events? How is that enforced? Are we tracking it? Do we have trackers within the organization? Do we conduct periodic audits? These are all conversations that need to be had, and also concepts you need to learn for the exam. What constitutes a periodic audit? And how are we ensuring that employees understand what our privacy program dictates of them in their work in order to run the business operations? So ensuring that if there is going to be the secondary use of information, we have internal policy documentation or a checklist that organizations and business units can follow in order to verify that secondary use is allowed, and if it is not allowed, then ensuring that it is prohibited and it's not something that a business unit is going to go ahead and do. Let's talk a bit about vendor contracts, because one of the biggest risks that a business can encounter is bringing in the influence of a third party into the privacy landscape. A business, in your work as a privacy manager, you're going to see that different third parties treat personal data differently. If different third parties are treating personal data differently, that could impact or influence a business's privacy program. Let's say, for example, your organization as a privacy manager, you have the best privacy program in the entire world, but you need to liaise with a third party because you need to use their application for certain HR activities. There are different factors in protecting your own business's personal data that could be influenced by the usage of this application. So in that respect, you're going to need to conduct something called due diligence. What does due diligence look like at the business? It means looking at internal privacy documentations of the vendor to verify that their privacy program aligns with the privacy program of your business. Who is doing that review? That is something that needs to be created by the privacy manager. That again rolls back into the discussion of roles and responsibilities that we discussed in Domain 1. Who conducts the due diligence for the vendor? Who verifies and approves a vendor based on this review? Who ensures that the vendor contracts are negotiated in a manner to protect the personal data that is being provided to the vendor? Put a role and responsibility there. And one of the concepts that you see in terms of the examination and the style of questioning is you're going to need to be able to put different types of concepts together. And when we look at protecting personal data in Domain 4, we can see that there are influences from Domain 1 on those roles and responsibilities, and also executive leadership buy-in on the privacy program, because that's going to influence each role or process when liaising with the vendor. In totality, what that leads to is the protection of personal data. So you need to not only be able to understand who constitutes a vendor within the organization, you also need to be able to understand what the vendor contract dictates and what your business is able to accept from a risk perspective based on the internal policy documentation that's been created by the privacy manager in liaison with the Privacy Council. The last thing I want to talk about in this video is the privacy technologist's role. So the privacy technologist generally is going to put into place the requirements for the product creation. And when we look at the privacy program, we talk about roles and responsibilities. Privacy technologist's role is different to the privacy manager's role, because generally the technologist is going to be going into different features of product design that impact personal data. Privacy manager is looking at all of the operations within the organization and making sure that there is adequacy in the usage, collection, storage, and deletion of personal data from a policy perspective, looking at those policies and looking at enforcement. So there's going to be liaison with the privacy technologists in that in the protection of personal data, the creation of the products are going to need to protect personal data in a specific manner based on that internal documentation. And that is going to be guidance that the privacy technologist is going to obtain from policy documentations from the privacy manager. So understanding the relationship between the privacy manager and the privacy technologist is going to be key in understanding this domain and the requirements for protecting personal data in every respect. So I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed the breakdown of Domain 4, which is protecting personal data. If you have any comments about what I've stated for Domain 4, or you have any insights to add as you study for this certification, leave them below, and I will see you in another video.